Welcome back to Panda's Nightmares. Tonight's video takes us into some of the darkest moments of human experience. Real stories from people who killed in self-defense. These are the kinds of situations no one ever wants to face, where split-second decisions mean the difference between life and death. These chilling accounts are raw, intense, and unforgettable. Before we begin, I want to share something personal. I'm raising funds for my dad's medical treatment, and your support would mean so much to me. If you'd like to help, the GoFundMe link is in the description below. Thank you for being here, and now, let's dive into these harrowing stories of survival and self-defense. Story 1. I killed a man who tried to break into my apartment because he was looking for his wife, whom he had just beaten severely. At around 2 a.m., I heard them arguing through the bathroom wall. I shut my bathroom door, then my bedroom door, to drown out the noise. 15 minutes later, she was banging on my door. Her nose was broken, her left eye was swollen shut, and she was limping as though she had tripped while trying to escape. I let her in, told her to go to the bathroom to clean herself up, and then hide in my bedroom. Moments later, her husband came out of their apartment, yelling her name. He noticed the trail of blood leading to my door and started banging on it, demanding I let him in. I warned him 3 times to stop, telling him that if he came through that door, I would kill him. He ignored my warnings, kicked in the door, and as it swung open, I brought my baseball bat down onto his head. He fell to the ground, landing on his stomach. That is when I saw a handgun tucked into the back of his shirt. I grabbed the gun, threw it inside my apartment, and warned him one last time. He got up and came at me again. I hit him in the stomach with the bat, then brought it down on his head a final time. The force of the blow caved in his skull. Blood spattered everywhere, and I knew he was dead. Fortunately, the neighbors had already called the police. Just as he hit the ground, the officers arrived at the top of the steps. The police interviewed everyone who had witnessed the events. They spoke to the wife in my bedroom, where she refused to leave. She gave her statement from there. I gave my own account of what happened, handed over the bat, and showed them the gun, which was registered to him. I called in to work that day. It is an experience I will never forget. Story 2. He did not die, but he came close. Back when I was a manager at a grocery store, one of my employees was being sexually harassed by this 19 or 20-year-old guy. I asked him to leave her alone, and he responded by threatening me, saying he would catch me when I was alone. At the time, I lived in a smaller-sized town, the kind of place where it is easy to follow someone or find out personal information. I did not have a car, so I walked home after closing the store around 9 or 10 p.m. I was in my early 20s. My younger brother, who was 2 years younger than me, was known around town. He had a reputation for getting into trouble, while I was more of a goody two-shoes. Feeling nervous about the situation, I called my brother and told him what was going on. He decided to meet me and walk me home that night. As we were walking, the guy suddenly came zooming down the street in his car, nearly running us over. He parked on a side street and came running at us. As he got closer, he started screaming about how he had found out I had a young daughter and began threatening to kill her. I saw red. I hit him first, but I am a terrible fighter. I ended up tripping over myself, and before I knew it, he was almost on top of me. That was when I heard my brother yell, "Hey, I think he has a knife. What the hell?" Panicking, I kicked up at the guy to keep him off me. My brother came running full force and landed an uppercut so hard that I heard something pop. The guy fell, and the pocket knife he was holding landed on the ground next to him. He started to get up and reached for the knife. In that moment, I ran up and kicked him in the jaw as hard as I could. Blood splattered everywhere. He slumped to the ground, silent. My brother and I, terrified, ran all the way home. Once we got there, my brother reassured me, saying the guy deserved it. Still, I felt disgusting and like an absolute piece of garbage. About a month later, I stumbled across a GoFundMe page. It was for a young man needing jaw reconstruction surgery. The description said he needed multiple surgeries and had to have his jaw wired shut. The page mentioned that he had been in an accident on a specific date and time, which matched the exact date and time of our fight. I was completely shaken. What stunned me even more was that the guy never reported the incident to anyone, not the authorities or anyone else. He did not try to come after us. I believe we could have argued self-defense if it ever came to that, but the whole situation still makes me feel uneasy. It is something I think about from time to time, and it never sits right with me. Story 3. I used to work as an over-the-road truck driver. One night, while I was parked at a truck stop, I got out of my truck and was attacked by a man with a knife. He initially approached me casually, chatting about how many people were at the truck stop. He even kind of resembled George Carlin. Suddenly, everything changed. He started calling me the N-word and tried to stab me with what looked like a steak knife. We ended up grappling for what felt like an eternity, though in reality, it was probably only a couple of minutes. I managed to get a firm grip on the hand holding the knife and another hand on his throat as he tried to pry me off. The struggle was intense, and I was using every ounce of strength I had to keep him from stabbing me. Thankfully, a couple of people noticed what was happening and intervened. They helped pull him off me, and he collapsed on the ground. Later, I found out that his official cause of death was cardiac arrest. It could have been from the exertion of trying to stab me, from the struggle, or from the fact that his face had turned red and his eyes were bulging by the time he went down. It was likely a combination of everything: my grip on his throat, his own effort, and the stress of the situation. Story 4. In 2020, I worked as a maritime security contractor, defending a ship during an assignment. It was a unique and challenging experience that started when my friend, a former Army Ranger, got approached by someone in his veterans support group about security roles. He was excited and shared the opportunity with me. At the time, the company was desperate to fill roles due to vaccine requirements limiting their candidate pool. Although I lacked military experience, I was offered a position because of my rifle proficiency and EMT background. I later found out I was being paid less than the others, but it was still a significant amount for a few months of work. After completing training, I boarded the ship in the UAE, bound for Mombasa. Everything changed when we were engaged by pirates during the voyage. I remember standing watch and seeing a spark from a ricochet hit a pipe, causing fluid to burst. It was the moment I realized this was not just training, I was being shot at. The concept felt so foreign that it took me a second to process what was happening. The noise faded. All I could hear was my breathing and heartbeat. Boats are typically loud, as is gunfire, but in that moment, it was eerily silent to me. I raised my rifle over the sandbags, and by sheer luck, my reticle landed on a pirate in a small skiff. I saw his face clearly. He was wearing a blue Cookie Monster shirt and holding an AK. My breath hitched in a way I'd never experienced before. I flicked off the safety, aimed at his right cheekbone, and pulled the trigger. The report later stated that I hit another pirate, but I don't remember that moment at all. What I do recall is seeing blood on the back of their boat through the scope. It's an image that has stayed with me. Before taking the job, I bragged about how I'd be fine if anything happened. That confidence evaporated after the encounter. My boss gave me the number of a therapist, a veteran who had fought in the Black Hawk Down battle. Speaking with him probably saved my life. I struggled with intense anger toward the pirate for forcing me to take his life over something as senseless as money. I would have paid him to leave us alone. This bitterness stuck with me, alongside an overwhelming awareness of life's fragility. A simple movement of my finger ended two lives. I often think about the man in the Cookie Monster shirt. Was he a brother? Did he have someone waiting for him at home? What were his hopes, his joys? A few nights after the incident, we watched Star Wars on the ship. During the scene where a stormtrooper crashes into a tree and dies, I broke down completely. It was a moment I had seen countless times before, but now it hit me differently. I sobbed uncontrollably over the death of this faceless character in a movie. My therapist helped me reframe my feelings. He asked, "What if someone told you to shoot him and you wouldn't get paid? Would you still do it?" My answer was yes, because I needed to protect myself and my crew. He helped me see that I didn't take a life for money. I did it to protect the people I was responsible for. That understanding gave me some peace, but the weight of that day will stay with me forever. Story 5. This isn't about me, but someone I know. She's a grandmother who had a beautiful, happy marriage with her husband, a Vietnam veteran. They shared a deep connection, and their life together was full of love and joy. Unfortunately, her husband fell ill unexpectedly and passed away. About a year after his death, she started seeing someone new. Sadly, after experiencing a lifelong, loving relationship, she found herself in a relationship where she was being abused, something she had never endured before. I imagine she stayed with him out of loneliness. From what I've heard, one night at his house, things escalated. In a moment of fear during an attack, she grabbed a loaded gun that was nearby. He was a former police officer and owned several guns. She shot him, and he died. His adult son, who was in his 40s, happened to be home at the time, playing video games. She had to go to him and explain what had just happened. Together, they called the police, and she was arrested and charged with murder. The local news picked up the story, publishing her name and reporting that she had been arrested for murder. This 80-year-old woman spent several days in jail before being released. The case remains open, and her lawyers have warned her not to discuss the incident with anyone. Not her family, not a therapist, no one. They have said detectives may come back years later, looking for any reason to reopen the case and prosecute her. It is heartbreaking. The local news story is still online, and anyone who searches her name will think she is a murderer. She went from a blissful marriage to unimaginable trauma in just 18 months. It is truly tragic. Story 6. I was 18 at the time. It was around 2 p.m. and I was walking back from the gym with my headphones on. I decided to take a shortcut through the back of a construction site. Out of nowhere, 3 guys jumped me. One of them hit me in the ribs with an iron bar, and I instantly fell to the ground. The other 2 started going through my stuff, trying to take my bag, but I refused to let go. They began beating me relentlessly. In a moment of pure desperation, while I was lying on the ground, I grabbed a cobblestone and swung it. I felt something splatter on me, but I didn't know what it was at the time. Thankfully, a security guard from a nearby hotel saw what was happening and chased the other 2 guys off. He took me into the hotel and called my parents. The next morning, we went back to the site to check, and there was a pool of blood on the ground, but no sign of anyone. A day later, we heard about a funeral for a young man in his 20s who had been found dead in the neighborhood. My dad told me to forget about it. The police told me to forget about it. But honestly, I can't stop thinking about it. Story 7. I've never killed in self-defense, but I did commit what was considered attempted murder in self-defense. The level of force I used was later ruled to be unreasonable, and I ended up serving 6 years in prison. To put it simply, my mother had a partner at the time who seemed like an angel at first, but eventually revealed his true nature. One night, they were arguing, and things were escalating dangerously close to violence. I called the police, hoping they would arrive in time to de-escalate the situation and prevent anyone from getting hurt. Unfortunately, the police didn't show up quickly enough. 45 minutes after I made the call, my mother's partner lunged at her with a knife. He had her pinned on the sofa, using all his weight to press down on her neck. I could hear the horrible noise my mom was making, a mix of fear and desperation as she struggled to ask for help. It was a sound I will never forget. I had armed myself earlier, fearing something like this might happen. He was a foot taller than me and outweighed me by about 70 kilos. In that moment, I pulled the knife from my pocket and plunged it into his back 3 times, puncturing both his lungs. I managed to get him off her by putting him in a headlock. In the struggle that followed, I stabbed him multiple times in the neck, face, ear, and eye. I was charged with attempted murder and pleaded guilty for several reasons. The court decided the force I used was excessive. I was sentenced to 11 years and 4 months, serving half in custody and the other half on license. It's something I carry with me every day. Story 8. I won't go into too many details because my case went to court and made the news, so I'll keep it brief. I was staying at my parents' house while they were on vacation, thankfully not at home during the incident. A man broke in through an upstairs window while I was in the basement. He clearly didn't expect anyone to be there. When I heard him, I popped out and screamed. That's when he grabbed a nearby knife and came at me. In the chaos, I ended his life instantly. A second, younger intruder ran off, stealing the car in his escape, but he was caught almost a full day later. He was initially charged with manslaughter, though the police later reduced the charge to murder. He was eventually convicted of the original charge and has since been released. The case dragged on in court for about 2 years. I was ultimately cleared of all charges. I only spent about 20 minutes in jail before being moved to an interview room and released. In Canada, you're allowed to defend yourself, but you must prove it was necessary. The whole ordeal cost me $600,000 in court fees, a lifetime of trauma, and the constant guilt I carry. Was it worth it? Yes, because I survived. Would I use a gun if there were ever a next time? No. It happened over 15 years ago, and while I've moved on, it's not something you can ever forget. The sound of someone dying, even someone who means you great harm, is truly awful and stays with you forever. Story 9. My squad was chasing an armed suspect. When we finally caught up to him, I saw my partner run up behind him and grab his shoulder. The suspect pulled out a gun, turned to face my partner, and started raising the weapon. That moment is etched into my memory. I can vividly recall the movement. His right arm bent as he drew the gun. His tricep shifted from vertical to horizontal as he pulled it out, then back to vertical as he aimed it at my partner. I was about 3 yards away, off to the side, when I heard a gunshot and saw my partner stumble back. Instinct took over, and I shot and killed the suspect. The following weeks were tough. The news was all over the incident that same night, and by the next day, it had blown up on social media. A local news station interviewed the suspect's mother. I didn't expect us to agree on what had happened, but hearing her grief still hit me hard. I had taken her son away from her forever. Her child, someone she had poured all her love and dreams into, was gone in seconds because of me. The weight of that reality was overwhelming. People said he didn't deserve to die, and maybe he didn't. But deserve had nothing to do with what happened. My actions weren't based on what he deserved, but on the simple fact that I didn't want to die, and I didn't want my partner to die. I carried the guilt of his death and the grief of his mother for a long time. It took years of therapy and support from my peers to come to terms with it. I've accepted that while I played a role in his death, he was ultimately responsible. He made a series of bad decisions that forced us to act. His choices led to that moment. It still feels cruel, like a cosmic joke, how fragile life is. My finger moved half an inch, and now a mother will never see her son again. A child will grow up without a father. It's messed up. It's something I'll never forget. Story 10. When I was 14, I was hitchhiking and got picked up by a guy who seemed alright at first. He had cases of beer behind the seats and a fist-sized ball of hash in the center console. He got me buzzing hard on beer and hash, and then he started getting handsy. He aggressively grabbed me multiple times, and being much bigger and stronger than me, he accelerated the car, making sure I couldn't escape. I was terrified, but I had a padlock with me, the kind you'd wear like Sid Vicious. It was hanging off my belt, since it was too heavy to wear around my neck for long. In a moment of pure panic, I swung it like a mace and caught him hard in the temple. The car veered off the highway, through a ditch, and into the trees, coming to a sudden stop. I hit my head so hard in the crash that I blacked out. When I came to, he was slumped over the wheel with a nasty dent in his temple, blood pouring from the wound and bubbling out of his mouth. I freaked out and ran through the woods alongside the highway, until I reached a massive cornfield. I kept running through the corn until I got to a small hill, where I could see flashing lights and multiple stopped vehicles on the highway. I heard sirens in the distance and panicked, running further into the woods. I eventually buried myself in a pile of fallen leaves, expecting to hear police dogs any minute. Somehow, I fell asleep like that, still clutching the chain and padlock. When I woke up, it was dark and quiet. I could hear the occasional car passing on the highway, but nothing else. I was still terrified, so I backtracked away from where we had crashed and made it to the trees lining the highway. I kept walking through the brush until I saw a break in traffic and stuck out my thumb. Someone stopped and gave me a ride not long after. As we drove past the crash site, I could see the tire marks, but everything else was gone. To this day, I don't know if he lived or died. Years later, I tried searching through local newspapers and online archives, but couldn't find anything. All I really know is that he picked the wrong kid to mess with that day. I tell myself that he died, and that maybe I saved someone else from being his victim. I've come to terms with it, and now it's just a distant memory. Story 11. I used to work graveyard shifts as a gas station clerk, and during one of those shifts, I shot and killed 2 armed robbers. I was in the back when they burst into the store. As I walked out, they charged at me, and one shoved a gun in my face. They dragged me to the front, forced me behind the register, and made me open it before throwing me onto the ground between them. One stood on either side of me, both facing away. One was grabbing all the menthols, yes, really, while the other was emptying the register and grabbing scratch tickets. I had no plans to resist. I wasn't going to say anything or do anything except lay there. It wasn't my stuff, and my only goal was to survive. But then they started talking about killing me for no reason. I'll never forget one of them saying, "We gotta go. Let's murk this fool. Blood." At that moment, I made a decision. I carried a .40 handgun for defense, even though it was against the rules. As I rolled to my side to make my move, I noticed the guy by the register had no magazine in his gun. I drew my weapon, rolled onto my back, and fired 2 shots into the chest and neck of the guy taking the cigarettes. Since I hadn't seen his weapon yet, I swung back the other way and fired 3 shots into the second guy's thoracic cavity. The store fell silent. Shaking, I called the cops immediately and waited the 10 or so minutes it took for them to arrive. They confiscated my gun for the length of the investigation, but thanks to the security footage, that was all I had to deal with. They gave me some crime victim resources in case I needed support and left. Somehow, I kept my job. A couple of weeks later, a detective came in and told me those 2 guys had robbed nearly a dozen stores in the past month. At most of those stores, they had severely beaten or killed the employees. After hearing that, I stopped feeling guilty about the brains splattered across the Marlboro Light display. Story 12. The concept of self-defense is complicated when it comes to soldiers. In my case, everyone I killed, well into the high double digits, would have killed me if they had the chance. Most of those moments were not particularly memorable. That is not to say I am a sociopath, though I understand how it might sound. It is just the reality of combat. There are only a few instances that have stuck with me, two of which I will share. The first time I killed someone was not just one person, it was 5. They were Al-Qaeda militants crossing a river on a small boat in Uruzgan province, Afghanistan. I am an artilleryman, and the first round we fired detonated above their raft, killing all 5 of them. At the time, I felt a surge of excitement, more than I probably should have after taking human lives. Even looking back now, I do not feel any regret for spilling their blood. The most memorable and traumatizing moment, however, was an accident. A rocket-assisted projectile malfunctioned due to a manufacturing defect and fell significantly short of its target. Tragically, the shrapnel from that round hit a young Afghan girl. Her family brought her to our firebase, and we tried to save her, but she did not survive. I still have nightmares about that one. Story 13. I'm not sure how well this counts since the guy is very much alive, but I did give him a pretty severe concussion. Back in 2017, I was working as a cook at a restaurant bar. We were closing up when a very drunk guy somehow got in and started causing trouble. I am not sure how he got in or what he wanted. He made his way to the kitchen, where he shoved one of the servers, causing her to hit her head on the edge of a stainless steel table. She ended up needing stitches. After that, he turned his attention to me. This guy was a lot bigger than me. He was taller, not exactly hard to be, and decently built. However, he was also completely drunk while I was sober. He came at me, and I hit him with a jab to the chin, which caused him to stumble back. He tried to swing at me, and that is when I hit him with a full-force hook to the side of his head. I used to box growing up, but this was the first and only time I have ever thrown a hook to someone's head, and I do not plan to do it again. After I hit him, he kind of half stumbled and half seized backward. You could practically see his brain short-circuiting. That was when the cops arrived and took him into custody. I was not charged, as it was clearly self-defense, with several witnesses and video footage to back it up. Apparently, I gave him a pretty nasty concussion. He ended up with felony assault charges for injuring the server he pushed into the table. It turned out this was not his first offense for assault. I quit that job a few days later. Story 14. Not me, but I got a call from my then boyfriend saying he had just shot someone at work. From what he told me, 2 guys rushed him while he was at his job. They were armed with something like a crowbar or similar, but they didn't realize he had a concealed carry license and never went anywhere without a gun. He shot one of them 3 times in the chest, and the guy died right there on the floor. I drove to the scene because it was 11 p.m. and I was freaking out. By the time I got there, a bunch of nosy people had already shown up because, well, small towns. A news crew showed up too, and I ended up yelling at them because they looked like high school kids and I just couldn't deal with it. The cops didn't arrest him, but they did take him away from the scene to avoid issues with the growing crowd. It was a pretty clear-cut case of self-defense, and he had shooter insurance to cover him. Surprisingly, he continued working there for a little while after the incident. Honestly, I think he might have been a bit of a psycho, because he didn't seem to have any PTSD over it. Instead, he would get drunk and brag about it, which was just weird. The crazy part is that I had briefly worked at that place before. I once asked the manager what would happen if we got robbed, since there were no cameras, no panic button, no first aid kit, nothing. The manager brushed it off, saying, "No one's going to rob us." A few weeks later, someone literally died there. I hate to say it, but I told you so. Things just got wilder after that. A relative of the guy who died overdosed not long after, and then that guy's mum also overdosed. 3 people ended up dying because of all this. It's just wild. And on top of everything, I can't even get an employee discount there anymore. Story 15. He didn't die, but he might have if I hadn't stopped. We were both teenagers working at a car wash, and he was a hot-headed boxer. a bit bigger than me and a year older. He was always instigating something, and one day he went too far by spraying bleach at my face. I told him to stop, but he did it again. That was it for me. I lunged at him, pressing his face and right wrist into the wall, yelling at him until he dropped the spray bottle. Some of his friends were there, surrounding us and yelling for a fight, trying to escalate things. He punched me in the ribs with his left hand, so I shoved him off the wall onto the ground and started to walk away. Then he started taunting and threatening me. I turned around and he was squared up, ready to fight. He threw a punch but missed, and I got behind him, grabbing his midsection and sweeping him off his feet. We both went to the ground, and I pulled his arms around his front like a straitjacket. I just laid on top of his back, yelling in his ear about how stupid he was and that I didn't want to hurt him, or something along those lines. His friends were yelling at me to stop, and I shouted back that he didn't seem ready to give up. Eventually, I stopped and realized he had passed out, probably because he couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding as I walked to the manager's office and told her what had happened. After that, I got a reputation as the wrestler who couldn't fight, but I never came close to a fight again. Seeing him face down on the concrete, his arms wrapped under his chest, completely out cold, was a wake-up call. I didn't throw a single punch, and it didn't even cross my mind that he might not be able to breathe in that position. That experience changed me. I became a much quieter person and focused on school so I could get a job where I wouldn't have to deal with confrontation. I lost my heart for wrestling after that too, realizing just how dangerous it could be. And that's the end of tonight's gripping and intense stories. If these accounts left you reflecting on the fragility of life, or the strength it takes to survive, don't forget to subscribe to Panda's Nightmares for more powerful and unforgettable tales. Hit the like button, follow for updates, and check out my other videos for more thought-provoking and chilling content. And one final note, if you can, please consider supporting my dad's medical treatment through the GoFundMe link in the description. Your kindness and generosity truly mean the world to me. Thank you for watching, and remember, in the darkest moments, survival often comes at a cost. Stay safe, stay aware, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.